Okay, good morning and good afternoon, everybody, to where you are. Again, my name is Nathan Dean. This is the Bloomberg Intelligence Financial Policy Weekly Washington call. I'll try and come up with something a little bit better to call it. That's a lot. But we have a lot to go through this week, so I'm going to be somewhat brief. First thing to talk about is the government funding fight that did not occur over the weekend. Obviously, the government did not shut down. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but what you need to know is that Congress has agreed to punt new deadlines to March 8th and March 22nd. Now, 6 out of the 12 appropriation bills are up for March 8th. If the failure to agree on that, those agencies would shut down. The rest would go on March 22nd. But we are highly confident that neither date is going to experience a shutdown. In fact, language was sent out over the weekend in regards to this. Just I'm going to look off my notes here. You're looking around 25% of the agencies out there being funded, $436 billion. There's not a lot of policy writers in here that are going to cause controversy. There are things like here, like agreements with Marshall Islands and the nation of Palau, for example, but nothing in here that's really going to cause a controversial aspect. And some of the agencies that are impacted here are, this is for this weekend, Ag, Transportation, HUD, VA, Energy, Commerce, Justice, and so forth like that. So we anticipate that Congress is going to vote on this. They're going to pass it this week, and then this would keep those agencies funded through September 30th through the rest of the fiscal year. Then what happens with the March 22nd? Well, the rest of it, they probably will come to an agreement by then, but if not, they'll kick the can to, April. And ultimately, I do think that they are going to come up with an agreement that pushes this to September 30th. So they can avoid the 1% sequester that was due to begin or would begin on the evening of April 30th. So, long story short, or maybe the short story long is lots of headlines, lots of thoughts, lots of catalysts, and so forth, but ultimately, again, no impact. Other things to talk about, well, just briefly, the Supreme Court is rumored to be releasing its decision on the 14th Amendment today. Now, I don't cover this, but I just wanted to highlight is you're going to see a lot of news headlines in the next few hours if that's the case. Tomorrow is Super Tuesday here in the States, which means 16 states go to the polls to vote on their nominee for president. Over the weekend, Nikki Haley actually won her first primary, the District of Columbia primary. But again, I think the general consensus here is that President Trump is going to dominate the primaries in Super Tuesday on his path to this reelection of President Biden versus President Trump. So stay tuned. Maybe we'll see a surprise or two out of a various state. Also this week, Fed Chair Jerome Powell is going to the Hill to testify in the House Financial Services and Senate Banking Committees. Now, these hearings are monetary policy focused hearings first. And if you have any monetary policy questions, let me know, or I'll put you in touch with Ira Jersey, BI's chief rate strategist. He's our Fed whisperer when it comes to that. But I want to focus a little bit on the regulatory side because when you're in the House Financial Services Committee, for example, and there are 55 members and they all want to ask questions, there's only so many questions you can ask about monetary policy. So what are we anticipating Jerome Powell to ask on or to answer on regulatory? Well, it's primarily Basel III Endgame. Does he support substantially changing the rule and or reproposing it? Can he give us an update on where the Fed is? More likely than not, his statement is going to be very benign. It's going to be very, well, we'll take that into consideration and we're working on this and so forth. Don't anticipate him to give us any indication on when this is going to happen, but it doesn't mean that people aren't going to try and get him to provide us some details on that. So that's primarily the thing that I'm looking for. But also don't be surprised if you see other questions like executive compensation. Representative Velasquez out of New York, for example, loves to ask questions about this old 2016 proposal that would actually restrict or curb banker bonuses. So if you hear a little bit of chatter, that's what it's referring to. Other things like climate change and stress tests and so forth like that, that could get some play, but ultimately it's the Basel III endgame for us. Also testifying this week is the CFTC Chairman Rostin Benham over at the House Ag Committee. Really, this is going to be crypto. Unless you're in the derivatives world and you care about things like margins for DCMs and FBOTs and all those other three-letter acronyms, if you will, really what the key catalyst for us is cryptocurrency. Now, we anticipate Chair Benham to reiterate his call for crypto oversight of the spot markets for the CFTC. But again, Cryptocurrency legislation is just something very difficult to come by. We've heard Senator Stabenow over at Senate Ag is dusting off her crypto bill, partly because the farm bill seems to be going nowhere and she's retiring at the end of this term. Also retiring is Patrick McHenry, the chairman of the House Financial Services Committee, so don't be surprised if he does a little bit more on stablecoins, because these individuals really want to try and make one last push before they leave Congress for good. But I think for the chairman's testimony at House Ag, you're really not going to see much. On Thursday, we're going to have a webinar, the bank webinar. The bank team is going to talk 1 year after Credit Suisse and Silicon Valley Bank. So if you want to listen to that, it's free to all. Just shoot me an email and I'll put you in touch with the registration page. On Wednesday, you're going to also have the SEC finalize its climate change disclosure rule. And I know we talked about this last week, but I just want to reiterate that the rumors or the news reports that are coming out suggest that this rule is going to be drastically scaled back. No scope 3, and there's a question out there whether or not mandatory reporting of scope 1 and scope 2 is actually going to be included, or just more of a suggestion or a guidance. That one I'm not exactly sure on, but where we're at here is we're still going to see lawsuits after this. The SEC is going to make a claim that this is a much, I don't want to use the word weaker, but a much more amicable rule to the industry. And don't be surprised if you see Chairman Gensler go out there and try and sell this rule to Wall Street, especially when it comes to European regulations that are coming out. They're going to require most of these mega companies, these international conglomerates, to go into that more in-depth climate analysis than they would on the SEC side. So keep that in mind. Actually, the day after the SEC meeting, the Investor Advisory Committee over at the SEC is meeting, and I just wanted to call out that they're actually updating recommendations on AI and what they call DEPS. Funny enough, the acronym I can't think of at the moment. All you need to know is that it's called predictive analytics. And what the SEC is doing is they have a rule out there on predictive analytics. The reason why I'm calling this Investor Advisory Committee updated recommendations out there is it gives the SEC a little bit more breathing room if you're in the AI space for brokers. So just give me a call if you want to talk about that. I actually just put my stuff out on the terminal this morning. Now, the last thing I want to talk about, and I actually was going to mention that the cherry blossom tracker from the National Park Service is out. It's March 23rd to 26th is the peak bloom. So if you're coming to DC, those are the dates you want to shoot for. But on Thursday night, obviously, we have the State of the Union. Now, my colleagues and I at Bloomberg Intelligence have been putting out notes about what our previews are. Andrew Silverman on tax, Dwayne Wright on healthcare, mine on consumer-related fees is going to go out tomorrow or Wednesday. But the thing you should note about State of the Unions, especially the ones before an election year, is that you don't really need, you get grandiose, broad ideas and so forth like that, but you don't get a lot in terms of actual catalysts that you can use in the markets. And the question that I ask all of my clients to look at when they watch a State of the Union address is that when you hear something coming out of the president's mouth, ask the question, how is President Biden going to implement it? There are 3 ways that things really get implemented in Washington. The first is the legislative way, working through Congress. And as you all know, Congress, not so much doing these days. The second thing is the regulatory route, having the Fed or the SEC or the CFTC implement your goal for you. That really takes time, and you got to have the leaders in place, and it takes years, as we've seen with the Basel III endgame. And the third way is executive orders and directing the executive branch. Now, the power of the presidency, and I know we've talked about this before, the power of the presidency is much more powerful when it comes to foreign policy, trade, and tariffs and so forth like that. So when you hear something from President Biden's mouth on Thursday night and you say, okay, how is he going to implement this? Go back to those 3 scenarios, think about it. Obviously, you can happy to call us, ask questions and so forth like that. But if he says, I'm going to call on Congress to do this, probability goes down. If I'm going to direct my regulators to do that, it takes a long time. Or if I'm going to direct my staff to do this, chances are it's either going to be very symbolic or maybe not all that much impactful. So hope that helps. If you do have any questions, please feel free to reach out, and I'm always happy to chat, and I wish you the best of weeks. Thank you. Great. Thank you, everybody.